In many ways, Guy Gabelich is a typical 17-year-old. He goes to high school, hangs out with his friends, and dreams of leaving home someday. But there is one thing that sets Guy apart. At the age of 6, half of his brain was removed in a hemispherectomy operation that likely saved his life. Examining the effects of this radical procedure can give us a better understanding of how the nervous system, and especially the brain, affects human behavior.
Well, at the very beginning, he always held his head to the left, and he held his head up high, and most small children, infants, don't do that. So that was the beginning of, do we have a problem here? And he didn't have a lot of strength in his right leg and in his right hand. He had his hand clenched most of the time, but most babies do, so you don't really know. We went in to see Dr. Carnet, and he had a CAT scan in his office, which was really unheard of at that time. But he said, look, I've got it here. He tests out normal when I'm testing him, you know, the visual, but let's do a CAT scan. And 2 hours later, he had us in his office, and he said, this is a picture of your son's brain, and I'm sorry to tell you that he had a stroke, and it probably occurred at birth. And there was a big black spot on the left hemisphere of his brain. He said, all I can tell you is take him home and, you know, we'll just have to see what happens. Chances are he will experience seizures. And, of course, that was devastating. I was having a great deal of trouble with it. I thought, oh, my goodness, is he going to read? Is he going to write? Is he going to go to school? You know, is he going to walk? Is he going to talk? Because nobody really had any answers.
What does it mean to be human? From the psychologist's point of view, explaining the human experience begins with an exploration of what it is that makes us human: the brain. The ability to walk and talk, to read and go to school, to perceive the world around us, to remember past experiences, and to feel emotion. These lie at the core of our humanity, and the brain plays a major role in them. But these tasks would be impossible without the body's primary communication network, the nervous system. The nervous system is divided into two main parts: the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system includes the brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system is made up of all the nerves outside the brain and spinal cord. Biological psychologists have long been interested in how the nervous system processes the information it receives, and more importantly, how this information affects our behavior. With such an important role to play in our well-being, what would happen if a key part of the nervous system, the brain, were damaged beyond repair? Guy Gabelich was about to find out.
At 10 months, Guy started having seizures. And initially they were staring spells. And you couldn't get him to come back. You could wave your hand in front of him and he just didn't see you. And he had every medication that was possible. He became a study. After Dr. Carnet went through all of the combinations of drugs and none of them really worked, what they did was really take away the life out of him. I mean, eventually he would lay on a pillow and he was drugged, and it was a terrible experience to see, what you did to a small child. When I walked into UCLA to see Dr. Shields, and he stood in front of me when Guy was 2.5 years old, and he said, well, we have this new surgery that we can do where they remove half the brain. And I was like, you have got to be joking. Remove half of my child's brain? I'm sorry, there's no way, we can't even discuss that.
What in the world makes you think that you can make somebody better by taking out half of their brain? When you have a problem like he had with severe seizures, Those seizures were interfering with the other part of his brain. That good right hemisphere could not function normally because of those seizures. The reason that we do the surgery is not just to stop the seizures, but to give that child a chance to have a more normal developmental process. I think he was on his way to being institutionalized by this time. He wouldn't have been able to function well enough to live at home. He certainly wouldn't have been able to go to school and have a job or do anything that he's able to do now.
And so we went home, and it was time to decide if we were going to do it or not do it. And I looked over at him one night. I thought he was sleeping, and he got up and he sat up in bed, and I know that he thought he was talking to me by the way he was playing with this doll that he had. I knew he was telling me something about it, but nothing was coming out of his mouth. So I called Dr. Carnet, and he immediately put him on phenobarbital. And he said, I think we've got to get this surgery scheduled, and you've got to do it now, because he thought it was moving over into the right hemisphere. So we did, and October 3rd, 1988 was when Guy had the hemispherectomy. And it was the longest day, but it was truly a gift. It changed his life forever.
At 6 years old, Guy Gabelich now faced the rest of his life with only half the brain that the average human being has. How would this incredible event affect the inner workings of his nervous system? And what effect would it have on his future?
Cat, go. Where are the candles? Cat, here.
In thinking about how the nervous system works, I think we have to have a conception of what it's doing for the organism. It receives information, it processes that information and actually compares it with previous information, and then produces output, which is the kind of behavior the organism needs at that point in time to better adjust it to the world around us.
In order to comprehend the far-reaching implications of any brain injury, it helps to have an understanding of the structure and functions of the normal human brain. With an average weight of about 3 pounds, the adult brain is divided into 3 regions: the hindbrain, the midbrain, and the forebrain. The hindbrain regulates many of our most basic life functions, such as breathing and heart rate. The midbrain is involved in processing auditory and visual cues, making us aware of the world around us. The largest region of the brain, about 90% of its mass, is called the forebrain. This area is involved in more sophisticated behaviors and higher mental processes. For example, the forebrain takes raw sensory data, such as light and color, and combines it with our memory and past experience, allowing us to form meaningful perceptions.
We know that a chair is hard. We know that if it's leather, it has a certain smell. We know how to spell it. And we can make a rough sketch of just a generalized chair. All of that is based in the conceptualization of a group of touch inputs, a group of visual inputs, auditory inputs, and even smell or olfactory inputs in the front.
The outer portion of the forebrain, the cerebral cortex, is divided into 2 cerebral hemispheres, the right and the left. Both hemispheres of the cerebral cortex can be further divided into 4 lobes, each with a distinct area of function. The frontal lobe of the brain is associated with behavior. In the prefrontal area, the behavior is of a planning type, such as preparing for some future event. The more posterior part of the frontal lobe is associated with voluntary muscle movement. This is where the brain determines the precise muscles that will be used in a particular act. The parietal lobe is involved in processing sensory information, such as touch, temperature, and pressure. As we move to the posterior region of the brain, we find the occipital lobe. This includes the primary visual cortex, where visual information is received. Finally, the temporal lobe, located just above the ears, is the primary receiving area for auditory information. Dividing the brain into regions helps us understand its basic functions. But the real power of the brain lies in its unique ability to have its parts work together as a whole. An example can be found in a region of the hindbrain called the cerebellum.
The cerebellum, which really means little brain, is this highly notched or foliated area, and it's a remarkable tissue all of its own. It seems to be involved with smoothing, synchronizing, making function flow smoothly. If I'm going to do a golf swing, I know that I address the ball, I come all the way around, and then I try to follow through. The cortex, which is analyzing and producing the swing, apparently produces a group of stop frame images, how it feels to be at that point, how it feels to be at that and at that. The cerebellum seems to fill in the whole swing. And so the two of them work together. And that, in a sense, is an example of how all parts of the brain are working together on any action.
In a normal brain, the left and right hemispheres are linked by a structure called the corpus callosum. This allows them to communicate with each other and share in the responsibilities of keeping the body running. However, in the case of Guy Gabelich, the stroke he suffered at birth had left him with a severely damaged left hemisphere. On top of that, continuous seizures made communication within the healthy part of his brain nearly impossible. Doctors hoped that a hemispherectomy would stop the seizures and allow what was left of Guy's brain to develop, but they could not be certain of the outcome.
When Guy first came home, I had a physician's prescription to see him every day, 7 days a week, including the weekends, which is really unheard of for home physical therapy. And I did that, and the first day I came here, I was absolutely blown away. Guy could not sit up. His eyes were spinning around in his head, and it took the full effort, my full effort, to get him in a sitting position and have him maintain that for even seconds. Within a week's time, he was back up. I came every day, but I'll never forget the following week, I came to the door, and Guy answered the door, standing up. "Hi, Sal," he said, and I was amazed that he could progress that quickly.
Okay, let's sing your cheese song. Rock-a-bye cheese on the counter. Guy likes to eat it all.
Of course, the obstacles Guy had to overcome were more than just physical. In the normal human brain, the left hemisphere is primarily responsible for language, a phenomenon called lateralization of function. Since Guy had his left hemisphere removed, his right hemisphere would have to develop this vital skill. But it would come at a price.
Lateralization means the control and processing of a particular cognitive function by one side of the brain. So for language, it's typically the left hemisphere. For spatial cognition, it's typically the right hemisphere.
I like Andrew.
You like Andrew, and who else?
Linda.
Go round.
I don't like Andy.
You don't like Andrew.
The brain has priorities in development, and one of the highest priorities for development is language. When you move language from the left hemisphere to the right hemisphere, something has to go. There was going to be a function in that area, and probably that is mostly spatial coordination. So somebody who has lost left hemisphere, begun to use right hemisphere for language, may go to the store, walk down the aisle, and then can't figure out where the front of the store is anymore because that spatial orientation is not as good as it would have been. They replaced that with language, which was a higher priority.
After I graduate from high school, I want to go away to college. I want to go to Ohio State for 4 years. I'm looking forward to living on my own because I'll be glad to leave my mom and not have her tell me the rules anymore or bossing me around stuff.
It's normal for a teenager to dream of living on his own, and Guy's wish may come true, but not in the ways he has planned. In an effort to give him more independence, his mother is preparing an apartment for him, located behind the house where they live. But Guy is still dependent on the services of a full-time aide. And although he has made progress in many areas, Guy has been unable to master some key skills, such as counting money.
Well, 2 quarters make 50 cents.
That's right, they do. And where's 50 cents on this?
Right there.
Okay, so if I put another marker there, now you're telling me that these 2 coins make 50 cents, and before you were telling me that all of the coins made 30 cents. Does that make sense?
No.
Why not?
Because that wouldn't be going in order.
No, we're not talking about order.
In addition, trauma to his brain has made abstract thinking impossible.
Abstract thinking is something that no child does. If you ask a child 5 years old, what does it mean to say people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones, they'll tell you that the glass will break. But if you ask somebody 20 years old, they'll give a more abstract kind of conclusion to that. That's supposed to develop at about junior high school age. So a child who's 12 will begin to answer those questions in an abstract way. Guy is now well beyond that age when one would expect abstract thinking to have started, and the fact that he doesn't have it now means that he probably will not get it.
But for all his disappointments, Guy has also experienced many successes.
You think it should be capitalized?
No.
No, that's right. So the interesting thing about Guy is that he had a left hemispherectomy, and the left hemisphere, the primary function is language functions. However, with Guy, because he did have seizures and other traumatic injuries to his brain prior to the surgery, it appears that the right side took over many of the functions. And so the last time he was evaluated, he had a thorough evaluation. It was determined that his oral language skills were actually an area of strength for him.
How is language possible for someone who is lacking the hemisphere of the brain that is normally responsible for this function? The answer lies in a phenomenon called plasticity, a sort of rewiring of the brain.
One of the very important things that we've learned over the past 30 or so years is that the brain is capable of substantial rewiring, especially the brain of young individuals or young animals. And that's especially true when the lesion is only on one side, a unilateral lesion. We know from experimental animal studies that when the damage is on one side, the opposite side of the brain actually takes over a number of the functions that would normally be mediated by the injured side. That is true of language functions, other higher cognitive functions. It's even true to some extent of more basic functions like just movement ability. So a person who loses part of the ability to move an arm or a leg, if that injury happens very early in development, the opposite side of the brain can actually grow some new connections and help to achieve a recovery of function of that limb that would be otherwise paralyzed if the injury occurred in an adult organism.
Structural plasticity refers to the, in a sense, the malleability of the brain to deal with insult and then sort of recover from the insult in a physiological sense, in a physical sense, to make new connections between neurons, to reorganize from the cellular level on up.
That makes sense?
Functional plasticity is, in a sense, on the level of the mind, cognition, and it refers to the ability to compensate for or recover from insult or injury so that an aspect of human cognition can develop or recover when a part of the mind is injured because the brain that serves as its neural substrate is injured.
Behind or in front of 29?
Yes. Okay.
As one of a small number of hemispherectomy patients in the world, Guy's progress has been watched with great interest by a number of scientists. In fact, he has become a willing case study for researchers who are trying to unlock the brain's mysteries. One of the difficulties researchers encounter in studying the human brain is its inaccessibility. Brain imaging technologies, such as CT scans, PET scans, and MRIs, make the process easier by giving researchers the ability to see inside the organ in a variety of different ways. There are two kinds of imaging technologies. Structural imaging allows us to see the structure within the body. Functional imaging reveals the brain in action.
This is an MRI scan that was taken a few weeks before Guy had his surgery, and you can see on this that the right hemisphere is fully normal. There's absolutely nothing wrong as far as we can see. However, the left hemisphere, which should be a mirror image of the right, has had a lot of damage, especially at the back part of that brain. You can see that the area is much darker, that the tissue has been lost. We recently did a repeat CT scan on Guy to see the structure of his brain. And very clearly that right hemisphere looks entirely normal. But interestingly, what we see is that the area of the left hemisphere is much smaller than it would normally have been because the right side has grown over towards that side. And I don't know if that's really that there's more brain or the brain grows to an area where there's less pressure. But clearly that left side is shrunken down a lot with just a little bit of fluid left in it. The functional MRI scanner is a great advance in our ability to see what's going on inside the brain. And it works by differentiating the amount of blood that's going to a part of the brain. So if I decide that I want to move my hand like this part of my brain has to become active to do that. The MR detector system can pick up that little change in the blood flow and compare it to what it was before, and then we get a picture that shows this part of the brain lighting up just a little bit. So we can do it with motor system, we can do it with language, we can do it with almost any function that the body has.
The ability to observe the functioning brain has brought researchers closer to understanding the inner workings of this, our most vital organ. One of the discoveries they have made concerns the effects of an enriched environment.
We know that if our little child sits by himself all the time and doesn't have access to books and toys and enrichment and friends, he doesn't develop his intellectual capacity to the same degree that one does when you're stimulating the whole cerebral cortex. We call it multisensory stimulation. If we put a rat in just a maze and he only learns to run a difficult maze, only one area of his cortex changes. But if we put him in our enriched environment with lots of friends and lots of toys, and we change those, because it's terribly important to change the toys. The rats get tired just like we do. Then we get the whole cortex to increase.
It's very clear to me that the children who do best developmentally are children whose parents are really dedicated to helping them every way that they can, to provide every opportunity for learning that they can. That enriched environment is absolutely critical for the best developmental outcome to occur. It's true for every child, but it's especially true for a child who's had a brain injury like this.
An enriched environment is crucial throughout life. An impoverished environment, one that lacks stimulation, love, and interaction, is harmful to all ages. Guy Gabelich has been fortunate enough to experience firsthand the positive effects of an enriched environment, thanks in no small part to the efforts of his mother.
Well, I don't think there's any question but that his mother's dedication has had a very important impact on his developmental outcome. He's done so well because his mother has worked so hard to help him do this well. If he'd gone home from the hospital and she'd turned on the television and said, "I'll see you later," he would not be doing this well. She provided every opportunity for that developing brain to do the best that it could do, and that's absolutely critical to the outcome.
Today, Guy Gabelich enjoys a fairly normal, happy life. Soon he'll finish high school and move from his part-time job at a mail services store into something more permanent.
I'm preparing to work at Ellen Paper Company. A lady named Miss Stank was the one who who got me the job over there at Postal Annex. And then she's talked with the people over there, saying I'm doing a pretty good job over there, and I'll hopefully when I get to Ellen Paper Company, I will able to stock shelves with the holiday stuff. It took me a long time to learn the things that I know today. Before I didn't know how to read, but now I do. I know how to count.
How much is this coin worth?
I know how to watch a movie over an hour. I've had a lot of teachers work with me on stuff. So beyond that, everything's good.
It's like families viewing their videos. You don't really do that on a regular basis. I probably watch them about once a year, and it reminds me about where we came from and how I need to appreciate where he is and where I am today. And it amazes me that we were actually in that spot, and how far he's come and what a miracle he is.
Much of the inner workings of the human nervous system, especially the brain, remain a mystery. As psychologists continue to strive for a better understanding of human behavior, people like Guy Gabelich go on about their lives. In the process, they teach us about the incredible abilities of the human brain and impress us with every step they take.